Hi there. Thanks so much for joining me today for the latest episode of Impact Real Estate Investing. My guest today is Justin Garrett Moore. Justin leads a double life that all comes together in one amazing package. He's an urban designer, and his day job is executive director of the New York City Public Design Commission. There he helps to guard quality and excellence in public space design, from large-scale urban systems, policies, and projects to grassroots and community-focused planning, design, and arts initiatives. But Justin also founded Urban Patch in Indianapolis, where he grew up. There, with his parents, he's deployed an incremental strategy, many layers of smaller actions that altogether add up to a big one, making his hometown a stronger, more beautiful, and more inclusive community. Be sure to go to evepicker.com to find out more about Justin on the show notes page for this episode. And be sure to sign up for my newsletter so that you can access information about impact real estate investing and get the latest news about the exciting projects on my crowdfunding platform, Small Change. Hello, Justin. Welcome to my show. You know, I didn't realize until I read your resume how much we share in common, because we both have architecture degrees. We both have a master's in urban design from Columbia.
Oh, I didn't realize. Okay, wonderful.
And I was also a senior urban designer in a planning department for a few years. But then
wonderful.
But then I drifted and went to the dark side and became a developer. And you became the executive director of the New York City Public Design Commission. So different paths, right?
Yes, thank you. I enjoy the urban design field because there are so many different things that you can do, whether it's developer, public, private, nonprofit. So it's a great field.
Executive director of the New York City Public Design Commission is a pretty hefty title. I'd love to know a little bit about what you do there in your job.
Sure. So here in New York, we're very lucky in that since 1898, the city has had a part of its city government, part of the bureaucracy of the city, a agency that is responsible for the oversight of the design of our public realm, our sort of common infrastructure of the city. So it was originally called the Art Commission. And this comes out of kind of the City Beautiful movement, kind of during that time period where you had a lot of new parks and boulevards and public buildings that were being done, not only in New York, but really all across the country or even world to make cities competitive and these sort of places of investment and activity. In New York, there's an entity that was created to help make sure that this was being done well, that there was some oversight and thought into how the city was being designed. So fast forward to today, the name was sort of updated from Art Commission to Public Design Commission. And so what we do is we review all the different projects that are happening in the city that are the kind of constant rebuilding and new building of our public amenities. So we review somewhere between 800 and 1,000 projects every year. And that can be street design. Yeah, it's a lot of work. It can be a street design. It could be park design. It could be as simple as a building rehab, or it can be a whole new development, whether buildings or even neighborhood scale redevelopment. So it's really fun. It's diverse. We get to work on projects all over the city and even upstate. So city-owned land upstate, we review those as well.
That's a lot.
So yeah, it's a lot. So I'm the kind of the head of the agency, but kind of the main force of the commission is that we have 11 volunteer members who have different backgrounds: architecture, landscape architecture, development, art, et cetera, who come in once a month and we review all of these projects. And our goal is to be sort of the quality control department to make sure that, the billions of dollars of development, kind of construction that's happening for public projects, that it's being done well.
That's really fascinating. So, in your time, I think you've been in this job for 3 years, but before then you were at the planning department for quite a while. So I'm wondering if
Yes.
you've noticed a shift in attitude to the design of place during that time.
Yes, absolutely. Going further back, so I started in the planning department straight out of grad school, and I worked in the Amanda Burton version of the New York City Planning Department. So for those of you who don't know, Amanda Burton was the planning commissioner for a long time, and she had an incredible focus and interest on public space and the role of design in the changing of the city. And so I did see early into my career, and just over, that's now, sort of 15 years, that there's a much greater interest in the importance and role of public space and public realm and the design of those spaces in being really an essential need for a well-functioning place, whether that's a particular building or site, or whether that's at a scale of a neighborhood or at the scale of the city. And so we've seen a lot of advancements and innovation and testing. Some things work, some things don't, but it's really great to see how it's almost like a movement of people that are interested and focused on making good places in cities. And it's coming from different sectors. It's not only coming from, the kind of the hero architect, the big firm, I say like the white guys just deciding how everything's going to be. There's a much broader coalition of people that are thinking about and operating with how we design our space.
That must be incredibly gratifying to you. I think it's really wonderful to hear that's happening. So
yeah, and working in government a long time, right? Things take a long time, so you work on things for years and years, and you don't see it in reality until later. But it's sort of like my favorite thing to go around to different projects in the city. I worked for a long time on kind of big waterfront redevelopments, and those projects take a very long time. But eventually you could go to a place and there's this new park or place or building or development that's in the city, and that you had kind of a direct role in helping to make that place happen, and seeing that it's well used and enjoyed and is kind of performing environmentally, socially, economically, et cetera. And it's always incredibly gratifying to see. And I tell people, okay, the gray hair is worth it for the stress to get some of these things done.
Yeah. So, I was interested to hear you mention the City Beautiful movement, which I'd quite frankly forgotten about. But, beautiful is not a word that's used often to describe places and buildings, at least in this country. I often wonder why, because I think beauty is really important, but it's been struck from our lexicon. What's your experience with that? We talk about excellence and words like
right.
That, not beauty.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, this is like the architect in me, right? So, we talk about good design and how should we be building and doing things, and talk about excellence. We break it down into the old architect ingredients of, beauty, commodity, and delight. Right. That there's multiple things. It has to function to be excellent. It has to kind of be responsible in terms of environmental or cost measures, but it also has to be, of interest to people. I mean, ultimately people are building it. So, giving some form of delight is important, and beauty is absolutely an ingredient there. I think the reduction of the use is that obviously that's incredibly subjective.
Yes, it is.
Especially in places that are fairly diverse like New York. So, you may go and have a project in a community that has one kind of major demographic group, and kind of their cultural reference points for what constitutes beauty may be very different from another group, or even kind of the amalgamation of all of our mutual agreement on something that's valued as beautiful. And so it's difficult to kind of have one idea or one word, right? During City Beautiful movement, there was, all these projects happening, and of course they're valued as beautiful, but they came out of a very particular
point of
progeny,
view.
right?
Yeah,
European, again, I hate to keep harping on it, but like there's a clear power structure that was communicated through that way of designing the city, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
during the modern movement, we had another version of that. So, kind of the modern plaza, there's no people or no any just clean space and the building and all of that, and maybe some kind of modernist artwork, right? That was a different generation, but it left out what we call the multitude of people, right? And their values of what's beautiful. So that's something that we have a challenge with, and frankly, every project that we look at and do in the city is that, we're not here to kind of be the arbiter of what is beauty and what is excellence. We have to have this sort of broader understanding of what that is and how you accomplish it.
Right. That's pretty difficult. I wish we could all celebrate all beauty because it's so important in cities. The other thing that you work on, that your second role, which I personally find extremely intriguing and pretty wonderful, is as founder of the Urban Patch. And yes. I'd love to chat about what you've accomplished with that organization in Indianapolis and why the Urban Patch.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So the origin story, I tell people, it kind of comes from two threads. Mentioned earlier that I went to graduate school at Columbia in the urban design program, and one of the studios I took during the program was working in Baltimore, in kind of Centertown, Winchester, kind of West Baltimore neighborhoods, working with something called the Baltimore Ecosystem Study, where it was ecologists working together with social scientists and designers to talk about how urban environments were changing through an environmental lens. One of the kind of foundational concepts of that work was something called urban patch dynamics. And so patch dynamics comes from the kind of ecology field, where you talk about how, for example, a certain species of tree may promulgate through a forest over time in this kind of incremental way, or different kind of patterns of change that happen, and that those kinds of patterns that we see in those kind of environmental contexts also happen in urban contexts. And so the basis of this is that change happens in these kind of patches or incremental ways, not only through kind of the big policy or project or top-down kind of thing. So that was something that very much informed kind of how I think about urban projects and urban change, and it's sort of been sitting there for a while. So that's one kind of thread. And then the other was that I had started kind of along with my dad doing some kind of family history and research, and learned that my grandfather was involved in this organization called the Flanner House. And back in the 1940s and 1950s, this organization did this really incredible work around community development and many different aspects of that, from food access and health through to jobs and skills to even housing, construction, and neighborhood planning and design. So it was this kind of moment of inspiration, like, wow, kind of Black people in Indianapolis and in that time period were able to kind of advance these really incredible projects that spoke to many of the needs and challenges that we do today. And so kind of inspired by that, but then thinking about how do I adapt it for today and the context now, I sort of borrowed from what I learned in that urban ecology studio working in Baltimore, and found a way through doing our own projects, kind of incremental scale work, that we could find a way to have positive change in our community. So it started very simply. My parents and I, we just said, okay, in our neighborhood where I grew up, which, it's a lot of vacant buildings and disinvestment or kind of a standard in our community, unfortunately. But we started with the idea we were going to take a vacant house and a vacant lot, and we were going to purchase them and fix them up and make them better. And if that worked, that we would just keep doing it again and again until our own little urban patch kind of grows and has a tangible and legible way of making our community better. So that was how it started.
It's a pretty fabulous story. It's really fun. And what has it become?
Yeah, so it's there's so many different layers to it. So this is where more of the kind of the urban ecology side comes through. But the idea is that you have a lot of many different kinds of actions that add up together. So we've done a number of different projects. We're up to 8 homes and 9, maybe 10 lots that we've done in this kind of, one by one incremental approach. But we've also done a number of different scales of operation. So we've done tree planting campaigns. So the neighborhood where we are, there's the issue with urban tree canopy. And so we raised some funds and were able to provide free trees to people that live in the community to help with the revitalization of the tree canopy across the entire neighborhood, and thinking about the many different kinds of people that live in the neighborhood, and that it was important to have this kind of long-term kind of connection to the neighborhood, but also some kind of a connection and similarity with one another, right? So you have kind of the old timers, like people who have lived in the neighborhood for decades, if not generations, and then you have the newcomers that, or along with gentrification, other things are coming new to the community and may not have kind of a strong link to the place or even to their neighbors who have been there a long time. We've done more of the placemaking type work, the idea that as our neighborhood is changing, that we're a part of the authorship and the impetus for that change. So we've done community gardens and kind of community scale artwork, murals and sculpture, things of that nature that we do in our neighborhood within our little patch, right, within our geography, that we can say, yes, this neighborhood is changing, but we are the ones who are changing it. And so it kind of brings in a different level of agency and conversation to development.
Oh, it's pretty fabulous. And are your parents enjoying themselves?
Yeah, so my parents are, they're retirement age, so it's they're always been very, very active people. I tell people I didn't fall far from the tree. I do a lot. My parents also do a lot, and so yeah, they're kind of the lifeblood of so much of this work. And the idea of kind of community development, the key word being community. So you have to know people, talk with people, kind of listen to people as you're doing this work. And so having that, I'm in New York, but my parents are still home in the neighborhood. They really are connected with these kind of changes that are happening, and we can do our work in a way that is navigating that and still being connected to the people.
So what's the current project that you're working on? In both places.
So the other thing is it's really 3 places. So in Indianapolis, it's incredibly exciting that we've worked with local neighborhood development corporation called the Mapleton Fall Creek Neighborhood Corporation, Development Corporation, sorry. And so there's a big 3-block, or really 2.5 block vacant site that's been in the neighborhood for a very long time. And we're working with a developer called the Community Builders out of Boston.
Oh, I know them, yeah.
Majora Carter Group here in New York, and Urban Patch to redevelop that site. So we're incredibly excited that the first phase of that is getting underway, and it's planning and process. We received our kind of zoning and planning approvals. We're waiting for the July, tax credit allocation time period to get some things lined up on funding. But that project has kind of the city and local support to move forward. And so that will be an incredibly transformative and frankly larger scale of development that we've been able to frankly bring some outside thought and outside people to our community. Like, we want the best for our community, and so finding new players and actors to think about how development can happen in our neighborhood in a new way. And the Majora Carter piece is that it's not just the kind of standard affordable housing tax credit project, but there's a component that will be around creating a local employment and food-related business hub as a part of that development, so that we're not just bringing housing, but also access to some much-needed jobs.
So that is pretty fabulous. And did you know I interviewed Majora a few weeks ago?
Oh, okay. Wow.
She's amazing.
Yes. A genius, in fact.
I'm jealous. I want to be there doing this project with you. It sounds absolutely terrific. So,
yes.
What about in New York? What's your favorite thing you're working on there, or something that excites you?
Yes. So here in New York, I think, especially at the Design Commission, we've been, as I mentioned, we look at a lot of different projects, so it's sort of crazy, nonstop work. But the kind of favorite thread that I have is that we have been doing a lot of work on affordable housing, and the idea that this conversation we had earlier about beauty and what makes excellence, that we did this whole research effort to actually talk about that. Right. So often affordable housing is sort of discussed with the pragmatics, right? We need a number of units, it needs to be affordable, we need to get construction costs low. But we wanted to elevate the conversation about how do we get excellent affordable housing? And that looks like different things. It's not necessarily that a architect designed it. Is it accomplishing the many different layers of how you have a well-designed building, whether that's aesthetic or functional, or about how it fits in with its context or community. And so we developed something called Designing New York Quality Affordable Housing. So it's a free guide. Anybody can download it. There's even an app. Yeah, there's even an app. So you can go download our app, and you can find good examples of affordable housing, not only in New York, but all across the country.
Yes.
So it's this sort of research project that we've shown and demonstrated the many different ways that you can accomplish good design for affordable housing while still meeting, your cost of construction and the different programmatic needs, whether it's on financing or kind of policy side.
Well, that sounds fabulous.
And so it's been this sort of great tool. And my favorite kind of project that came out of that work is something called the Peninsula, which is in the South Bronx. And this was at a former juvenile detention facility that had been a place of violence and terror for that community in terms of its young people being put into this unjust facility. It had been closed, and the city redeveloped the site, and we were able to kind of have an early design conversation about what is going to make this reimagination of the site, positive for this community, not only, when the thing opens, but in the long term. And so we've got, a really great project that looks at design from many different angles, whether it's from the public space view or the building design view or the urban design scale view. And it's been a great result. And the project has, gone through all the approvals and broken ground, and we're excited to see it moving forward.
That sounds pretty fabulous. So I'm sort of in awe. This is really great. You're doing amazing work. So there
is one more thread, which kind of a branch of Urban Patch, where we're also designing, building, and developing affordable housing in Kigali, Rwanda. And so that's kind of our next phase of work, is sort of how these conversations about the need for good quality design and housing go to even some of these global contexts where there's truly an incredible need, rapid urbanization happening in the sub-Saharan African context. And so we've started doing work there and are nearing completion by the end of this year of our first 8-unit mixed income housing development that will have some market rate and some affordable housing, which is a pretty unique sort of proposition in that development context.
And who are you partnering with there?
So we're the kind of the designer developer on the project, but we're working with, there's an NGO called SCAT Consulting, and so they do essentially technical assistance around everything related to building, right? They look at the whole pipeline, so everything from construction materials and the training needed to build through to addressing some of the policy issues that are necessary to get certain types of development to happen. So they're an NGO or connected to an NGO, the Swiss Development Corporation. And so they're providing this technical assistance, procuring those suppliers and labor and all of that is work that they've been doing on the ground. And so we're coming in as kind of the designer and kind of combo designer and developer who's funding the project and sourcing from, kind of the suppliers and people that they've developed over time, and working, of course, with a local architect of record for filing and construction management and all of that. So it's been a really exciting project.
And so how do you fund that? Like you said, you're acting as a
bootstrapped. Yeah. So Urban Patch, the business model of Urban Patch is that we started with these projects. We don't ever flip them. We don't sell them. We keep the asset. And as I mentioned, the neighborhood has been gentrifying. And so there was a significant amount of equity that it built up in those projects. And so we were able to access some of our equity from our holdings in Indianapolis to completely self-fund the project in Rwanda.
I mean, that's a stunning example of how some gentrification can actually help a neighborhood, right?
Right. Yeah. So that's the kind of the other thread. It's not the origin story, but something that happened with Urban Patch was that very early on and sort of came in full conflict with the realities of the world of real estate and urban development in America. So mentioned, bought the first house, bought the first lot. We went to go buy that first house. I was not able to get financing to buy that first house, even though I had, six-figure income, had the down payment needed, had a near perfect credit score, and no one would loan me money to develop in my own neighborhood, right? But I'm looking and it's like, well, we see, frankly, all these white people coming in and they don't have this problem. They do it all the time, and you can look mortgages, you can look that stuff up. You could look it up and see they're getting mortgage for a house 2 doors down. And so the racism in the whole system still exists.
Wow.
And so the project became this it ended up becoming this anti-gentrification project, and not necessarily anti-gentrification in general, but how do we get a different kind of result out of these processes that are radically changing our communities. So the first project I actually I was like, I'm going to do this. And so I maxed out all my credit cards and I bought the house in cash. Was how I got that first deal done, because no one would give me a mortgage, even though I met every criteria that you're supposed to have.
And how much was the mortgage?
It was $122,000.
So not a lot of money.
Not a lot. No, not a lot.
Not like you were asking for a $2 million loan.
No.
So
it was completely absurd. It was completely absurd.
It's just.
It happens to this. It happens to this day. So people talk about redlining as if it's a thing in the past. Redlining still exists. It happens in a very surreptitious way, but it absolutely still exists. And the kind of the work that we ended up doing was to kind of subvert that. And so we ended up finding it's great. The Farmers Bank of Indiana, this kind of small community bank, that they will loan money to us now, right? It's insane, but you had to kind of find ways around to get the work done. And we've been able to kind of scale and continue our model in this incremental way. But frankly, the way that we're able to do that is that the prices in the neighborhood are going up. And so we're able to use equity to fund our next stages of projects and do it in a way that doesn't require us to charge our tenants a lot of rent. So essentially we're able to charge rents that are essentially kind of the cost of the transaction, right? The mortgage, tax, insurance, maintenance, management, right? So there's no profit that we're taking
Right.
as a part of that. Our profit is the fact that there's this value growing, right? Both the value of the tenants paying down the debt, but also the fact that the prices are going up in the neighborhood.
But let's be clear about this. It's not just your asset value, because by doing this, you've added value to the neighborhood.
Exactly. Yeah, we pay a lot of, the neighborhood and the city, we pay a lot of taxes. So these are vacant buildings and vacant lots that we're now paying for. There are multiple benefits.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. So, there's always small change. I'm dying to help you raise some money.
I'm a fan of small change. I forget how many projects of yours. I mean, I don't put a lot in, but I put a little bit, and they're all interesting to me. So I'm like, I have to do that. I have to do that. I love it. I love the platform.
I would love to help Urban Patch. I think you guys are amazing. So
thank you.
Yeah, it's pretty wonderful stuff. And I know this is redlining, but it's also not just about you. If I try and go into a neighborhood that hasn't had any investment as a white woman, I can't get a loan either.
Right.
There's no value there to get a loan against it. It's the entire neighborhood. It's like, I think maybe someone who's buying a house to live in it is treated as a different category by the bank. They're homeowners.
No, these weren't homeowners. These were flippers.
Oh, really?
That were coming into our neighborhood. This is the thing. The flippers, they come in, they get the little lady, and they scam her to get her house, and they know what the house can sell for, and they don't even fix it up. They just get in there, and it is a pervasive problem in Black communities across. It happens in Brooklyn. It happens it is a thing. But they're doing it at large scale, right? So they've got an established relationship with the bank, and the bank just says, appraisal, whatever. They wink, they send their appraiser out that goes and tells them the house is worth whatever they say it's worth. Appraiser comes out and they see, there's too many Black people around, and it's not worth that. The appraisal industry is all a part of it.
It is. It
is to this day a racist system.
Oh, it's shocking.
And Wells Fargo was. I mean, there are many layers to that part, which is why things like crowdfunding and other mechanisms are going to be more and more important, because these systems, by regulation, and there's a lot that they're not supposed to be doing these things, but they still do. And so sometimes you just have to find a different way.
So I hope that there's some bankers listening to this podcast and not come knocking on your door. That would be really a great outcome, right?
We've been, what was that? 2012 was the first one, and so we've been growing, and it's sustainable, and we don't lose money, we don't make money. Right, like on a cash flow basis, as I mentioned, we keep our rents low, so it's not like we're earning a bunch of money that way. But all of our assets are sort of growing as the longer we hold, the debt goes down, the equity goes up, et cetera. And it's designed in a way. Frankly, the real estate markets are probably going to soften, or if not crash, at some point soon. But our math is designed that we're charging significantly below market rents, and so if something crashes, it's not like, we can't command that rent. We still will be able to hold our property.
The crash of 2008, 2009, I had properties in Pittsburgh that were in neighborhoods that were really underserved, but really beautiful buildings, and I didn't even notice the crash.
Right, because the value is there, right?
No, the value was there, and here's where the word beauty becomes important. The units were really interesting and unique and lovely, and people wanted to live in them. And so
most of our homes are in a historic district, and so they are these. The embodied beauty and value is definitely a really key piece, and kind of on the historic preservation and asset side.
So hopefully that plays out again. Anyway,
Yeah.
anyway, really fascinating. So, given everything you do you think socially responsible real estate is necessary in today's development landscape?
hmm Yeah, I mean, I feel very strongly that the idea of connecting social responsibility and real estate is, I think, one of the best tools that we have for advancing social and economic equity. There's a lot of work being done on this, so kind of the community land trust movement and things of that nature, I think, are getting this. But the reality in the U.S., at least, is that the biggest kind of asset base that people have is still their homes and real estate and property, because the financial markets aren't necessarily accessible and advantageous for everyone or as many people as the real estate markets have been, and probably because they're tangible in some way. They're direct. You live in a neighborhood, there's a shop you go to, there's a house you live in. You literally experience it every day. And so I think people can naturally connect to and value that in a very direct way. Unfortunately, we hear mostly about the other sides of it, right? The market forces and the big investors come in and buy up, or even gentrification forces. But really thinking about how you can create business models and new models to use it as a tool to create stability, to grow wealth, to have some degree of self-determination in for yourself, for your family, for your community, however you define the scale of responsibility, can happen through real estate. And, we need to address some of the inequalities and unfairness that still exist that we were talking about before. But there's also the opportunity to talk about kind of the new tools and the kind of the models that we want to see that this can be done differently.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. So I have 3 sign-off questions I'm going to ask you. And the first is, so what is the key factor that makes a real estate project impactful to you?
Key factor. So for me, the key factor would be the kind of long-term sustainability, right? The main issue I have with real estate is the kind of the transactional piece, right? So when things are kind of flipped and exchanged in this kind of quick way, somebody has to make money, and it's not necessarily sustainable to do that over the long term. And so people or projects or initiatives that have kind of a longer view, and that could be, from a financial standpoint, like does it pencil out kind of a thing, but it can also be social, right? My model in Urban Patch, it's not dependent on us charging money or amounts that, people from our neighborhood cannot afford, right? There are models that do rely on that, and there are models that don't. It could even be, there's a lot of conversations, UN Sustainable Development Goals and climate and Green New Deal, right? Long term, like the environmental prospects of a project, right? So that sustainability piece has social, economic, and environmental dimensions.
Yeah. So the second question, I actually think you answered in an incredibly interesting way, but I'm going to ask it again. Do you think crowdfunding can benefit and impact real estate developer in more ways than just raising money?
Oh, yes, for sure. I think crowdfunding has the potential, not totally there yet, but definitely the potential to increase and broaden access to having more people be able to participate in real estate and to have some kind of ownership of change that may be happening in their communities. And I think that the existing models for access to capital and access to resources, it takes a lot for people to get into those systems and to be able to operate. But crowdfunding does have the potential to sort of make that not such a high bar, for people, both on people wanting to invest and to have ownership, but also people that are, just trying to get trying to get a deal together to do, to get their idea out there, right? And that you can kind of have benefit to both of those kinds of players.
Yes, yeah. And then finally, and this is the really hard thing, but if you could fix one thing or improve one thing about real estate development in the U.S., what would that be?
Oh, the racism. It still exists, and you have to acknowledge that it still exists to do anything about it.
Yeah. Yes, I acknowledge it. That's a pretty chilling story. So
yeah, it's interesting. Elizabeth Warren and Castro, a lot of the current Democratic candidates have, in some of their policy papers and things, have been pointing to recent scholarship. So the Richard Rothstein, The Color of Law. Forget the author, The Color of Money. So there's a lot of kind of research and scholarship coming out on this, where people are identifying these things and noting the kind of the present day effects. And so I'm really happy to see that conversation happening more and more.
Well, this has been a really wonderful conversation, and I wish you all the best with your next projects. I'm sure there's going to be many of them. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, happy to do it.
That was Justin Garrett Moore. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and there are just too many takeaways to share them all. But here are my top 3. I love that Justin talked about the need for beauty, commodity, and delight in urban design. I love the idea of patch dynamics, change growing incrementally from little patches. And I love that Justin is developing an affordable housing project in Rwanda. You can find out more about impact real estate investing and access the show notes for today's episode at my website, evepicker.com. While you're there, sign up for my newsletter to find out more about how to make money in real estate while building better cities. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. And thank you, Justin, for sharing your thoughts with me. We'll talk again soon, but for now, this is Eve Picker signing off to go make some change.